There was once an empire at its height. It was called Tahuantinsuyo, the realm of the four quarters. And its current emperor, Huayna Capac, had just stretched it farther than any before him. Reaching north into valleys and mountains, no Inca had ruled. And just as he settled in Quito, near the farthest reaches of his kingdom, word came of the arrival of men unlike anyone had ever seen. The arrival of these strangers would bring about death in many forms: disease, betrayal, war. It would tear down the empire from within and without. But before that, there was a strange and beautiful moment of curiosity, promise, romance, and hospitality. Before the Civil War, before the pestilence, before the first drop of blood was shed, there was a ship sailing down a coast, which was concealing a hidden empire. This is the last emperor, the rise and fall of the Incas. The natives of the mainland, when they saw the ship coming across the sea, were astonished because they were seeing what they had never seen nor heard of before. They did not know what to say about it. The people of Tumbes watched the Spanish ship from the shore, astonished. They saw white sails billowing like clouds and a hull larger than any canoes they used. Fear mixed with wonder. They whispered among themselves, unsure whether these beings were gods, spirits, or men. Dropping anchors, the ship stopped by Tumbes. Some Indians who had been captured earlier in balsa skirmishes and who had now traveled with the Spaniards leapt into canoes and paddled ashore, rushing to report what they had experienced. They did not stop until they reached their lord, and told how, while sailing over the sea, they had encountered that ship, where there were white men clothed and with great beards. The caciques listened amazed, as the Indians described these men clothed, bearded, and sailing on a floating fortress, and word, through Mitimai messengers, would be instantly carried swiftly towards Huayna Capac's court in Quito. But as the messengers raced over the mountains, Tumbes resolved not to let fear close its gates. Instead, they sent gifts. They prepared 10 or 12 rafts full of food and fruit, with many jars of water and of chicha and fish and a lamb which the virgins of the temple gave to take to them. The Spaniards, still aboard their ship, received them with delight. Pizarro smiled and beckoned them closer, eager to see the gifts and hear their news. Among those who came with the balsas was an Orejon, a noble of Tumbes. He stepped forward and spoke through the native interpreters. He told the captain that they could safely come ashore without any harm and supply themselves with water and whatever else they lacked. Pizarro replied warmly that he feared nothing from men who came in peace. Yet before stepping ashore, he tested the ground cautiously. He first sent a sailor named Bocanegra in a small boat to collect water and speak with the Indians. Bocanegra was welcomed, and with Indians who helped him, he filled 20 barrels of water, the natives helping him to do it as I say. Meanwhile, the Orejon remained aboard the ship and would spend the entire day there, from morning until vespers. He looked so closely at everything and asked so many questions that the Spaniards were astonished to see such a clever and intelligent Indian. He asked the captain where they were from and from what land they had come, what they sought, or what was their intention of going by sea and land without stopping. Francisco Pizarro answered him that they came from Spain, where they were natives, in whose land there was a great and powerful king called Don Carlos, and that they had come to discover lands in those parts, and principally to give news of how the idols they worshipped were false and how their sacrifices were baseless, and how in order to be saved they must turn Christians and believed in the God whom they worshipped, who was in heaven and called Jesus Christ. The Orejon was amazed at all he heard. The captain ordered that they give him food and to drink of our wine, and he examined that beverage greatly, finding it better and more flavorful than his own. When he left, the captain gave him an iron axe, with which he was extraordinarily delighted, valuing it more than if they had given him 100 times its weight in gold. Before leaving, the Orejon requested that 2 or 3 Spaniards come with him to Tumbes, so that the people might see them and satisfy their curiosity. So Pizarro dispatched Alonso de Molina, and a black man who became the first ones to truly walk the streets of Tumbes and witness its marvels. At Tumbes, Alonso and his unnamed companion was led through 3 guarded gates before reaching the presence of the local lord. They saw stone fortresses, aqueducts carrying water through fertile lands, orchards and abundant crops, and animals the Spaniards would soon call the sheep of Peru, llamas namely. He was well served with food, as was the black man who went about from one place to another, for they wished to look at him as something so new and unseen by them. Many Indian women, very beautiful and elegant, and dressed in their own fashion, came to speak with him. All of them gave him fruit and whatever they had, so that he might carry it to the ship. And among those women who spoke with him was a very beautiful lady who told him that he should stay with them, and that they would give him one of them as his wife, whichever one he wished. When Alonso returned to the ship, he was nearly speechless. So overwhelmed was he by what he had seen that he said nothing at first. Eventually, he told his captain that the houses were of stone, and that before speaking with the Lord, he passed through 3 gates where there were doorkeepers guarding them, and that they were served with vessels of silver and gold. Pizarro listened in wonder to Alonso Molina's tales, but he was not a man easily convinced. What Alonso described seemed almost too marvelous to be believed, so he decided he must see it confirmed. He called for Pedro de Candia, a Greek gunner known for his keen mind, and ordered him to go to Tumbes and verify with his own eyes what Alonso had reported, so that he mark the land and see by where it would be good to enter, God willing they should return. Pedro de Candia eagerly agreed and set off at once. When he arrived at the shore, the Indians were gathered at the beach, as always, staring at the strangers who had come from the sea. They led Pedro de Candia through the city until he stood before the lord of Tumbes, who was surrounded by his nobles. They stared at Candia's strange appearance, at his armor, and at the great harquebus he carried. Word had already spread that his harquebus could produce a noise like thunder. So, they begged him to fire the harquebus he carried, because he had done so on the ship in the presence of some Indians. To please them, he set the match, and hitting a thick plank that was there nearby, split it as if it were a melon. The Indians, at the moment he fired the harquebus, many of them fell to the ground, and others cried out. The thunder of the gun startled the entire crowd. Some fell flat on their faces, convinced the Spaniard carried lightning in his hands. There were those who say that the lord of Tumbes, eager to test Candia further, ordered a lion and a tiger brought forth, to see if this strange man would defend himself or be devoured. If this happened, it would have been a puma or a jaguar, whether this tale is true or not. Cieza records it as something told among witnesses. And some say that the lord of Tumbes ordered that they bring a lion and a tiger, which they had there, to see whether Candia would defend himself from them or whether they would kill him, and that they brought them and loosed them at Candia, who, having the harquebus loaded, fired it, and that more Indians than before fell to the ground in fright, and that the animals came toward him as tame as if they were lambs. The lord of Tumbes, highly amused and astounded, offered Candia many cups of maize beer in admiration. He said, "Drink, drink, for with you so great a noise is made, that you are like the thunder of the sky." Pedro de Candia was treated royally. The lords questioned him eagerly about the Spaniards' intentions, and he answered as best as he could through the interpreters. During his stay, Candia saw the same wonders Alonso de Molina had described, and even more. He visited the Mamaconas, the virgins of the sun, who worked fine cloth for temple service. They had begged the lord of Tumbes that they might see this foreign man. The Mamaconas, who were the sacred virgins, wished to see him and sent to beg the Lord to bring him there. So it was done, and that they were greatly pleased to see Candia. They worked in weaving wool, making fine cloth, and in service of the temple. Most of them were beautiful, and all were very gracious. When Pedro de Candia returned to the ship, he brought news so staggering that Alonso de Molina's words seemed so small in comparison. For he said that he saw pitchers of silver and many silversmiths working, and that on some walls of the temple there were sheets of gold and silver, and that the women called women of the sun were very beautiful. The Spaniards listened nearly mad with longing. They had thanked God for what they had learned, and dreamed of cities of stone and treasures waiting in land. But Pizarro, cautious as ever, knew he needed even more certainty. So they continued exploring the coast, dropping anchor in coves and harbors, while word of their presence spread like fire through the coastal valleys. It was then that the sailor named Bocanegra decided that he wanted no more voyages, or salt spray. He deserted the ship entirely, choosing instead to stay among the people of Tumbes. A sailor named Bocanegra, seeing how good the land was, left the ship with the Indians and sent word to the captain that he should not wait for him because he wished to remain among such good people as these Indians were. They lifted him onto their shoulders and carried him inland, seated in a litter. Shortly after, Pizarro received a message from a woman whose name would echo in Spanish chronicles, Capullana, the noble lady of Tumbes. She sent word that she wished to meet the captain and promised to come aboard the ship herself to assure him of her peaceful intentions. When she came, Capullana was dressed in her finest clothing and adorned in ornaments of her land. She spoke with grace and asked Pizarro to come ashore and be her guest, offering to leave noble hostages behind to guarantee his safety. Pizarro agreed. He stepped onto Peruvian soil for the first time, accompanied by some of his men. They found a grand reception prepared, palm branches waving, and a green ramada where the Spaniards were seated. Halcón, a soldier among Pizarro's men, fell utterly and completely in love with Capullana. Halcón, the more he looked at her, the more lost he was in his love. He begged his captain to let him remain in Tumbes, asking to marry one of Capullana's women, but Pizarro refused, fearing such entanglements. Driven half mad, Halcón began shouting, "Cry, cry, scoundrels, for this land is mine and my brother the king's, and you have usurped it from me." Brandishing a broken sword, he charged wildly towards the Indians until Bartolomé Ruiz struck him with an oar and had him chained below deck. Meanwhile, Capullana, unfazed, continued to treat Pizarro's men with lavish courtesy. She offered them more gifts and entertained them with dancing and singing, performed by her people. Pizarro marveled at the richness of Tumbes, its fields, its animals, its organized towns, and its gentle people. And so, standing in that place of green water channels and stone walls, he performed a solemn act. He took possession of Tumbes and all its land in the name of Emperor Charles V. And when he saw himself on that coast, he said, in the presence of those who were with him, "Be witnesses for me how I take possession of this land with everything else that we have discovered for our emperor and for the royal crown of Castile." And having said this, he struck some blows, placing his mark as is customary. Finally, realizing how few they were to hold such a kingdom, Pizarro resolved that he must return to Panama, and then to Spain itself, to gather strength and secure the Capitulación de Toledo, a royal contract granting him permission to conquer these lands in the name of Charles V. But time would prove a ruthless ally. When he would return 4 years later, the world he had glimpsed in Tumbes would be gone. Everything would be utterly different.